Her white dress was a cloud of silk against the oil-stained pavement of the highway. Amara's heart stopped when the black SUV sped away, leaving her in a cloud of exhaust and broken promises. Her husband of exactly 20 minutes had looked her in the eyes and said she was no longer useful to his family's business. She stood alone in the heat, her veil catching on a jagged guardrail, clutching a bouquet of dying roses. Not a single car stopped as she walked barefoot, her heels abandoned miles back. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, heavier than the pearls around her neck. She wasn't just a bride. She was a woman discarded like trash on the most important day of her life. Then, the roar of a high-performance engine vibrated through the ground. A silver-armored sedan pulled over with clinical precision, its windows dark and impenetrable. The back door opened, and a man stepped out wearing a suit that cost more than Amara's entire village. This was Silas Thorne, a man whose name was whispered in fear across the city's underground. He didn't look at her with pity, but with a cold, calculated interest that made her skin prickle. He saw the bruises on her wrists where her husband had gripped too tight. Silas didn't offer a hand. He simply gestured to the leather seat inside. "The world is cruel to beautiful things," he said, his voice like velvet over gravel. Amara hesitated, knowing that stepping into this car meant leaving her old life forever. She looked back at the empty road, and then at the man who looked like both a savior and a predator. She climbed in, the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold air conditioning hitting her face. Silas didn't ask her name or where she lived. He already knew everything. He made a single phone call, and within seconds, her former husband's bank accounts were frozen. Amara watched the city lights flicker by, her fear slowly turning into a hard, cold knot of anger. She realized she wasn't being rescued. She was being recruited. The wedding was over, but the war was just beginning. They arrived at a sprawling estate, hidden behind massive iron gates and armed guards. Silas led her to a room filled with silks, gold, and technology she had never seen before. He told her that he had been watching her family's business rivals for years, and she was the missing piece. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a partner who understood the sting of betrayal. Amara looked at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, tearing the veil from her head. She saw a woman she didn't recognize, someone who was done crying. Silas stood behind her, his presence looming but respectful of her space. "Tonight you sleep," he whispered. "Tomorrow, we take back what they stole from you." By morning, the news was buzzing with the missing bride scandal, but Amara was already dead to the world. Silas sat her down in a high-tech war room and showed her the truth about her husband's family. They weren't just businessmen. They were small-time criminals who had used her as a pawn. Silas promised her power that would make her former husband tremble in his boots. He spoke of loyalty, a concept Amara thought she knew, but was now learning was the currency of the underworld. She felt a strange spark of hope, a dangerous warmth she shouldn't feel for a man like him. He was a monster, perhaps, but he was her monster now. The first test came when a group of her husband's men tried to reclaim her from the estate. They expected a weeping girl, but they found a woman standing next to the most dangerous man in the country. Silas didn't even draw a weapon. He let Amara speak the command that sent his security team into action. Watching her enemies fall felt better than any wedding vow she had ever heard. She realized that Silas wasn't just changing her life. He was rebuilding her soul. He looked at her with a glimmer of pride, a look her own father had never given her. The tension between them was thick, a slow-burning fire that neither was ready to acknowledge. As the first hour ended, Amara stood on the balcony overlooking the city she used to fear. She was no longer wearing the white dress. She was draped in midnight black silk. Silas joined her, handing her a folder containing the deed to her family's stolen land. He had tracked it down in less than 12 hours, proving his reach was infinite. Amara realized that the man who dumped her on the road had made the biggest mistake of his life. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the queen of a kingdom built on shadows. Silas leaned in, his breath warm against her ear, promising that the real revenge hadn't even started yet. Amara began her training, not in etiquette, but in survival and strategy. Silas pushed her to find the steel in her voice and the ice in her veins. She learned how to read people, how to spot a lie before it was fully formed, and how to handle a weapon. They spent long nights over maps and digital files, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Every time they touched, a jolt of electricity surged through Amara, but she kept her focus. She was learning that Silas was a man of deep scars, both physical and emotional. He wasn't just a boss. He was a man who had lost everything and built a fortress to protect what remained. The emotional walls Amara had built began to crack as she saw Silas's hidden side. He visited a local orphanage every week, providing food and protection for children who had no one. He didn't do it for PR. He did it because he knew what it felt like to be abandoned. This revelation made Amara's heart ache with a different kind of pain, longing. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the strength of his jaw and the sadness in his eyes. She wanted to know the man behind the myth, the human behind the Mafia boss. But every time she got close, Silas would retreat back into his cold, professional shell. A major gala was announced, the very event where her ex-husband planned to announce his new merger. Silas decided this would be Amara's resurrection party. He hired the best stylists in the world to transform her into a vision of power and grace. They chose a gown the color of blood, adorned with diamonds that looked like frozen tears. Amara felt like a warrior putting on armor rather than a woman getting dressed for a party. Silas walked into the room when she was finished, and for the first time, he was speechless. The silence between them was louder than any conversation they had ever had. At the gala, the room went dead silent when Amara walked in on Silas's arm. Her ex-husband, Kofi, dropped his glass, the sound of shattering crystal echoing in the ballroom. He tried to approach her, his face a mask of fake regret and sudden lust. Silas stepped forward, his hand resting possessively on the small of Amara's back. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the air felt thin. Amara didn't scream or cry. She simply smiled a cold, beautiful smile. She whispered a single secret into Kofi's ear, a secret Silas had helped her uncover about his illegal dealings. The twist came when Silas's own brother, a man who had been missing for years, appeared at the gala. He wasn't there for a reunion. He was there to challenge Silas for control of the organization. He accused Silas of becoming soft because of Amara, turning the crowd against them. The tension in the room spiked as weapons were drawn under silk tablecloths. Amara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, proving she belonged in this world of danger. Silas looked at her, and in that moment, she saw a flash of genuine love in his eyes. He realized she wasn't just his partner, she was his equal. They managed to escape the gala under a hail of gunfire, with Silas shielding Amara with his own body. In the back of the car, she saw blood soaking through his expensive shirt. Her heart plummeted as she realized he had taken a bullet meant for her. She used her wedding veil, the only thing she had kept, to bind his wound. The irony wasn't lost on her. The symbol of her deepest shame was now saving the man she was falling for. Silas gripped her hand, his strength fading, but his gaze remained fierce. "Don't let them see you cry," he choked out. As the second hour drew to a close, Silas was stable but weak, tucked away in his private medical wing. Amara sat by his bed, refusing to leave his side for even a second. She realized that her quest for revenge had turned into something much more complex. She was no longer just the bride who was dumped. She was the protector of the man who saved her. Outside, the city was in chaos as the war between Silas and his brother began to boil over. Amara picked up Silas's phone, her voice steady and commanding as she gave orders to his men. She was ready to lead his empire until he could stand again. Amara sat in Silas's heavy leather chair, the weight of his empire resting on her shoulders. Her ex-husband, Kofi, was desperate and had teamed up with Silas's brother, Marcus, to dismantle everything Silas had built. They thought with the boss in a hospital bed, the discarded bride would be easy prey. They were wrong. Amara didn't use guns. She used the ledgers Silas had taught her to read. She began leaking Marcus's offshore accounts to the very authorities he had been bribing. One by one, Marcus's allies began to vanish, fearing the woman who moved like a ghost through the digital shadows. Silas finally woke up, his face pale but his spirit intact. He watched from the doorway as Amara commanded a room full of hardened men, her voice never rising above a whisper, but carrying the weight of a hammer. He saw the transformation was complete. She was no longer the girl on the highway. He felt a pang of guilt for bringing her into this darkness, yet a surge of pride for how she had mastered it. When the room cleared, they shared a quiet moment where the air was thick with unspoken words. Silas reached for her hand, his touch light, and thanked her for holding the line. The danger shifted from the streets to the home when a mole inside the estate tried to poison Silas's medication. Amara caught the traitor, a mate she had treated with nothing but kindness. The betrayal stung, reminding Amara that in this world, love and kindness were often seen as weaknesses. She didn't call the police. She had the woman brought before Silas. Instead of the expected violence, Amara showed mercy, banishing the woman but sparing her life. Silas questioned her decision, but Amara explained that fear creates enemies, while mercy creates legends. Silas realized then that she wasn't just his equal, she was his conscience. As Marcus grew more desperate, he kidnapped Amara's younger sister from her village, using her as bait to lure Amara out. Silas wanted to send a strike team, but Amara knew Marcus would kill the girl the moment he saw a uniform. She decided to go in alone, dressed not as a mob boss's partner, but in the simple clothes of her village. Silas protested, but she looked him in the eyes and told him she had to save her own blood. He gave her a tracker hidden in a locket and promised that if anything happened, he would burn the city to the ground. Amara entered the abandoned warehouse where Marcus was hiding. He laughed at her, calling her a fool for coming without Silas. He didn't know that she had already contacted Marcus's own suppliers, offering them a better deal under the Thorn name. As Marcus raised his hand to strike her, his own men stepped back, refusing to follow his orders. Amara stood tall, explaining to the guards that Silas was recovering and that loyalty to a losing man like Marcus was a death sentence. The shift in power was instantaneous. The guards lowered their weapons, realizing the bride was the one holding the keys to their future. The twist came when Silas arrived, but not to save her. He arrived to stop her. He had discovered that Marcus wasn't actually his brother by blood, but a plant from a rival family decades ago. This revelation shattered Silas's sense of identity, making him question everything he fought for. In the chaos of this discovery, Marcus pulled a hidden blade, but Silas was faster. The confrontation ended with Marcus in chains and Amara's sister safe. However, the emotional toll on Silas was visible. He looked like a man who had lost his last tie to the world. Hour 3 ended with Silas and Amara standing in the ruins of the warehouse. The sister was sent home with enough money to live like royalty, but Amara stayed. She walked over to Silas, who was staring into the darkness, and placed her head on his shoulder. He finally broke down, the cold Mafia mask slipping away to reveal the broken boy underneath. She held him as the sun began to rise, proving that she was the only person in the world who truly saw him. The mission was no longer just about revenge. It was about two broken people building a new world out of the wreckage. With Marcus gone, a brief peace settled over the estate, but it was the silence before a storm. Kofi, Amara's ex-husband, had gone into hiding and was now working with a high-ranking government official to seize Silas's assets. They framed Silas for a crime he didn't commit, a cold-blooded hit on a public figure. The FBI swarmed the estate, and for the first time, Silas's power couldn't save him. He was handcuffed and led away, leaving Amara alone once again. But this time, she wasn't on a highway. She was in a fortress, and she had the keys to the kingdom. Amara realized that to save Silas, she had to play a game dirtier than anything she had done before. She went to the government official's office, not with a weapon, but with a recording. It was a tape of Kofi and the official discussing how they had planned to dump Amara on the road to keep her from inheriting her father's secret land rights. The official's face turned white as he realized his career was over. Amara didn't ask for money. She demanded Silas's immediate release and a clean record. She was learning that the greatest power wasn't in the fist, but in the secret. Silas was released, but the experience had changed him. He was tired of the shadows and the constant threat of death. He proposed to Amara, not for business, not for protection, but because he couldn't imagine a single breath without her. It wasn't a grand, cinematic proposal. They were in the kitchen at 2 a.m., sharing a simple meal. Amara said yes, but she had one condition. They would leave the Mafia life behind and turn their resources into a legitimate global empire. Silas agreed, ready to burn his old life to the ground for a chance at a real one with her. The wedding preparations began, but this time, there was no fear. Amara chose a dress that was simple and elegant, a far cry from the heavy, suffocating silk of her first wedding. She felt a sense of peace she had never known. However, Kofi wasn't finished. He had lost his money, his status, and his allies, and he blamed Amara for everything. He began stalking the perimeter of the estate, a ghost driven by madness. He didn't want the empire anymore. He just wanted to make sure Amara never got her happy ending. The emotional payoff happened when Silas took Amara back to the spot on the highway where he first found her. He had bought that stretch of road and built a small, beautiful park there. He told her that he wanted to turn the place of her greatest pain into a place of beauty. They stood where she had once wept in her wedding dress, now laughing and planning a future. It was a moment of pure healing, a slow-burn romance finally reaching its peak. They realized that their scars didn't make them ugly, they made them unbreakable. The twist came during the final dress rehearsal. Amara's dead father suddenly appeared at the gates. He hadn't died years ago, as she was told. He had been in hiding, protected by Silas's rivals. He revealed that Silas's family was actually responsible for the initial downfall of Amara's family. The man she loved was the son of the man who had ruined her life. This revelation hit Amara like a physical blow. Silas stood frozen, realizing that his father's sins were now threatening to destroy the only good thing he had ever created. As hour 4 closed, Amara was standing in the center of the ballroom, her father on one side and Silas on the other. The trust she had built over months vanished in an instant. She looked at Silas, seeing not her savior, but the heir to her family's suffering. Silas tried to explain that he didn't know, that he had spent his life trying to be different from his father, but the damage was done. Amara walked out of the estate, her heart in pieces once more. The cycle of betrayal seemed never-ending, and the woman who had become a queen felt like a lost girl again. Amara spent days in a small apartment in the city, reflecting on everything. Her father wanted her to help him destroy Silas and take back their fortune. But as she listened to her father speak, she realized he was just as cold and power-hungry as Kofi had been. He didn't care about her. He only cared about the assets Silas controlled. She realized that blood didn't define loyalty, actions did. Silas had saved her when she was nothing. Her father had stayed dead while she suffered. The choice became clear, but she had to play it carefully to ensure everyone got what they deserved. She returned to Silas, but she didn't come back with an olive branch. She came back with a plan to end the cycle of violence once and for all. She convinced Silas and her father to meet at a neutral location to negotiate the merger of their interests. In reality, she was setting a trap for both of them, not to kill them, but to force a truth that couldn't be ignored. She invited the media, the authorities, and the leaders of the other underground families. She was going to expose the entire system of corruption that had ruled their lives for generations. At the meeting, Kofi made his final move. He burst in with a group of mercenaries, intending to kill everyone in the room and claim the vacuum of power. In the chaos, Amara's father showed his true colors, trying to use Amara as a human shield. Silas, without hesitation, threw himself in front of her again. The mercenaries were neutralized by Silas's loyal guards, who had anticipated the move. Kofi was finally captured, begging for mercy he had never shown. Amara's father was disgraced, his cowardice caught on every camera in the room. The emotional climax occurred when Amara stood before the cameras and announced she was liquidating all the illegal assets and turning the Thorn Empire into a massive charitable foundation. She was giving the wealth back to the people it had been stolen from. Silas stood by her side, publicly resigning from his position of power. He didn't care about the money. He only cared that Amara was finally free of the weights of the past. They were no longer a mafia boss and his bride. They were two people who had chosen to be good in a world that tried to make them monsters. Kofi was sentenced to life in prison, where he would spend his days in the very obscurity he feared most. Amara's father was exiled, left with nothing but his bitterness. The missing bride story became a legend of empowerment across the globe. Amara and Silas moved to a quiet home by the sea, far away from the noise of the city. They spent their days working on the foundation, ensuring that no other girl would ever be left on the side of the road with no one to turn to. A year later, Amara received a letter from a young woman who had been rescued from a situation just like hers. The letter included a photo of the woman standing in the park Silas had built on the highway. Amara realized that her pain had become the foundation for thousands of other people's joy. She looked out at the ocean, feeling the sea breeze on her face. Silas walked up behind her and handed her a small bundle, their newborn daughter. They had broken the cycle of blood and betrayal. The peace of the beach house was shattered when a ghost from Silas's past arrived. A man named Victor, who had been Silas's mentor and the true architect of the Thorn Empire, appeared at the gates. He didn't come with guns. He came with a legal document that turned Silas's world upside down. It turned out that the foundation Amara had built was technically sitting on land that Victor still owned through a series of shell companies. He gave them an ultimatum: return to the life of crime and use the foundation to launder his money, or see everything they had built for the poor destroyed. Amara felt the old coldness return to her chest, realizing the war for her soul wasn't over. Silas wanted to handle Victor the old way, but Amara stopped him. She knew that if Silas spilled blood now, their daughter would grow up in the same shadow they had just escaped. They spent sleepless nights in their study, looking for a weakness in Victor's armor. Amara discovered that Victor's power came from a secret ledger he kept, detailing the crimes of every politician in the country. It was his insurance policy. She decided they wouldn't fight him with force, but with the very thing he used to control others, the truth. She began a dangerous game of cat and mouse, moving through the city in disguise to track down the ledger's location. The tension between Amara and Silas grew as the pressure mounted. Silas felt like he was failing to protect his family, and his old aggressive instincts started to surface. They had their first real argument in the nursery, their voices hushed but sharp. Amara realized that the mafia boss inside Silas wasn't dead. He was just sleeping. She had to save Silas from himself, while also saving their legacy from Victor. She made a secret deal with a journalist she had once helped, preparing to leak everything if she didn't return from her mission to Victor's stronghold. The emotional payoff came when Amara confronted Victor alone in his penthouse. He mocked her, calling her a charity case who got lucky. Amara didn't flinch. She revealed that she hadn't come for the ledger. She had come to tell him that his own daughter, whom he had abandoned years ago, was one of the people currently living in a shelter the foundation funded. The look of pure shock on the old man's face was more powerful than any weapon. For a moment, the monster showed a hint of a man. Amara offered him a choice: stay in the shadows and watch his daughter flourish from afar, or destroy everything and lose his only link to the world. The twist occurred when Silas burst in, having followed Amara despite her warnings. He didn't come to kill Victor, but to hand him a plane ticket and a new identity. Silas had realized that Victor was just a lonely old man clinging to power because he had nothing else. By giving him a way out, they removed the threat without becoming the villains. Victor took the ticket, his hands shaking, and disappeared into the night. It was a victory of the mind and heart, but it left Silas and Amara exhausted, their bond tested to the absolute limit. They sat on the floor of their living room, surrounded by the documents of their life. The threat was gone, but the strain had left scars. Silas confessed that he had almost reverted to his old ways, and he was terrified of the darkness still inside him. Amara held him, telling him that being a hero isn't about being perfect, but about choosing the light every single day. They watched the sun rise over the ocean, knowing they had survived the final test of their character. The foundation was safe, and their daughter was sleeping peacefully in the next room. 5 years passed, and Amara was now one of the most respected women in the country. The discarded bride was a title she wore with pride, a reminder of where she started. She had built schools, hospitals, and a system of protection for women in her home country, ensuring the cycle of abandonment was broken. Silas had become a silent partner, the man who stayed in the background to ensure his family's safety. Their daughter, Zola, was a constant reminder of the future they were building. However, one final piece of the past remained, the land where Amara's family had once lived. They traveled back to the village where Amara's wedding had originally been planned. The villagers welcomed her as a hero, a queen who had returned to heal her people. But Amara saw that the land was still being exploited by a new corporation that looked suspiciously like her father's old associates. She realized that her work wouldn't be finished until she fixed the place where it all began. She didn't use Silas's money this time. She used the legal expertise she had gained to win back the land for the villagers themselves. It was the final act of her transformation from a victim to a leader. The emotional climax of the entire journey happened at the very spot on the road where she had been dumped 7 years ago. A statue had been erected there, not of a bride, but of a woman standing tall, looking toward the horizon. Silas stood beside her, his hand in hers. He told her that finding her on this road was the only good thing he had ever done. Amara looked at him and realized that she didn't need a savior anymore. She had become her own savior, and Silas had been the man strong enough to let her grow. The twist that tied everything together came when a young man approached them. He was the driver of the SUV that had sped away on her wedding day, the man who had been forced by her ex-husband to leave her there. He was older now, his face lined with guilt. He handed Amara a small box that he had kept all those years. Inside was her mother's wedding ring, which her ex-husband had tried to sell. The driver had stolen it back and had been searching for her ever since to return it. Amara realized that even in her darkest moment, there had been a small spark of kindness she hadn't seen. Amara took the ring and, instead of keeping it, she gave it to a young girl in the village who was about to be married. She told the girl that a ring doesn't make a marriage and a dress doesn't make a bride. Only the strength of her own heart matters. The gesture went viral, sparking a movement of women sharing their own stories of overcoming betrayal. Amara's life had become more than a story. It was a beacon of hope for millions. She had taken the worst day of her life and turned it into a lifetime of purpose. As the final hour drew to a close, Amara and Silas sat on the porch of a small house they had built in the village. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land. They were no longer the Mafia boss and the abandoned bride. They were just two people who had found each other in the wreckage of a cruel world. Silas leaned over and whispered that he was ready for whatever came next, as long as they were together. Amara smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and told him that the best part of their story was just beginning. The final scene was cinematic and powerful. The camera pulled back from the porch, flying over the village, the highway, and the city, showing all the lives Amara had touched. The screen went white, and a single sentence appeared. Never judge a woman by the day she was broken. Judge her by the empire she builds from the pieces. The music swelled into a triumphant, emotional finish, leaving the viewers with a sense of complete satisfaction and a tear in their eye. The journey was over, the revenge was complete, and the love was eternal.